Okay, well, welcome everyone to this last session of this 3 days. These 3 days, we have a plethora of experienced and knowledgeable HREC chairs, and we even have David Strogatz at some ungodly hour in the US. So, David, thank you so much for turning up. Let me just tell you very briefly about David, just because I have it on screen. Well, David is the co-director, the research co-director of the Bassett Healthcare Network Center for Rural Health and the University of, oh no, that's your PhD. You're in New York, Cooperstown, New York. There you go. So David, I know you are a long-term friend, acquaintance of Hudson. And it was with some arm twisting that we actually managed to get David on here. so much appreciated, David.
Glad to be with you, and thanks for the music. Kept me awake.
Actually, David and I haven't seen each other for 50 years, but we've had completely parallel career tracks. So it's wonderful to see you again, David.
Yeah, great to see you. You're looking very well preserved.
You haven't changed a bit, I'm sure. Okay, so we also have Robin Langham. Robin is the chairperson of the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, HREC. No, Robin, Royal Children's Hospital. Yes, my apologies. I just find them somewhat synonymous, so I'm terribly sorry about that. It's clearly not a Melbourneite speaking there. We have Annette Branach-Meyer. Annette, I can't remember where you're from, apart from the fact you're one of the chair people of one of the Bellbury ethics committees. I can't remember what institution you're from, though.
So I'm University of Wollongong, and I also chair the South Australian Department of Health and Wellbeing Committee.
Thank you, Annette. Well, you're a glutton for punishment, so I can say. We have Professor Di Ellie. Di is sometimes deputy chair, but has been the chairperson of the University of Queensland Ethics Committee B. Thank you, Di. Welcome to the party. And Michael Martin, Professor Michael Martin from the ANU. A sometimes running colleague, but was always much better than I was anyway. Michael, representing the Australian Capital Territory. And finally, we have Professor Tim Dare from the University of Auckland, who, and thank you, Tim, for joining us, recognizing you're several hours ahead, and it's probably tea time for you right now. But I much appreciate your being here. Now, I have given the panelists some questions to think about, and in what order they're going to come out, I don't know, but hopefully it will spark some discussion. If any of you wish to add some questions to the chat, some of these like wicked problems we've been dealing with, please feel free. So I do have about 11 or 13 questions. Okay, well, in fact, let's start because I can see Tim there. So Tim, New Zealand overhauled its ethics committee process in the last 10 years, I think. How have you benefited from that? And then aligned to that, we can ask one of the Australian chair people, how might Australia look at what you've done and benefit from that experience?
Well, it's not clear to me that the New Zealand overhaul has been a good thing. So we have, since the late 80s, had a system where we've got a quite regulated health ethics review process, so under statute and run by a Ministry of Health. The institutional ethics committees, so the university ethics committees, operate more or less independently. They're approved by our Health Research Council as an accident of history. That's the body which approves our health committees, and so it's got the task of approving our non-health committees too. We also have not committees, so I chair committees for our government ministries. They are neither health committees nor university committees, and they're a bit of a lacuna, really, because if you're not doing health ethics and you're not affiliated with a tertiary institute, then the chances are there is no ethics committee for you to go to. And so we're trying to set this up. So the reforms of 10 years ago were really to slash the number of health and disability ethics committees from 13 to 4 and impose time constraints on the health and disabilities ethics committees. Now, I opposed that at the time, and I haven't come to think I was mistaken about that. It doesn't seem to me that's been a good thing. I think we still have the lacuna that is non-health research being done outside universities, I think struggles to get reviewed. So I'm not sure that's what you had in mind, but I don't think any of that is a terribly happy story. Actually.
No, I didn't. I'm not actually sure what I had in mind, to be honest. So
okay, right.
I don't actually mind. Look, I might just ask David. David, welcome to the party. David, in the US, what are your thoughts on any particularly necessary changes that might be required of your IRBs?
We, in terms of recent changes, the common rule was updated, and at least from our perspective, the one change that has been sort of most impactful in terms of how we, do our work is the rise of single IRBs to be the IRB of record for studies that involve multiple sites. That is actually required now by studies that are funded by NIH. But even industry studies now are tending to look to this model of having a single IRB as the IRB of record with collaborating IRBs from the multiple sites. And what it has done is to really simplify things and help standardize things, relieve a lot of the work that would be duplicative across multiple IRBs at each study site. In terms, I've been chair of our IRB for something like 6 or 7 years, and for the few years before and years after, that's been the biggest and in some ways most positive change that we've had. Otherwise, things have been pretty much the same.
And of course, that reflects our own National Mutual Acceptance Scheme in Australia. So I'm kind of glad to say we've probably led you into that one. I mean, one always learns from other countries.
Yeah,
Robin, since I can see you on screen, do you think? I mean, obviously, as a hospital ethics committee chairperson, can you see any sort of fundamental flaws in the current system in a structural sense, I guess, rather than in a philosophical sense?
Thanks for that, Gordon. I appreciate that. With full transparency here, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a clinician. I'm a clinician researcher, and I tend to come at these sorts of questions from a very pragmatic sense. And to me, it's not so much where the flaws are, but in a more positive sense, how we can improve what we do. And I sort of feel that where we are now with this almost distant relationship with the body that credentials us as a group, being the NHMRC, that there is opportunity to develop a more collegiate role here without necessarily a heavy-handed credentialing body coming to see us all the time, but at least to have a much more visible ongoing iterative process of education and training that can be provided externally. I think more and more, at least from a medical perspective, we are coming up against really difficult areas of overlap with the law. And the law terrifies me, I'll be honest with you, but there's a number of different parts of the law, especially as a committee, that we need to address constantly. And it's being able to understand all those different parts, whether it's the Human Tissue Act or whether it's the Health Records Act or whether it's the Privacy Act or whether it's anything like that. To me, the nature in which research and clinical ethics is becoming much more of an overlap with different parts of the law is something that personally I think we should be able to access more nuanced training. I could give some possible examples from my other experience in being involved with the Australian Medical Council, where we credential colleges to deliver medical education, and they're left largely on their own. But the opportunity to be able to pick out bits and pieces and create workshops and engage everybody and and learn collaboratively from it, to me is probably more the sorts of thing I would like to see, rather than pick out where the holes are and say there's a
Wonderful.
fault there.
So that's great, and it gives me a good segue to the next question, which is, given the apparent lack of support for HRECs, and Michael, I might just address this to you. Given the apparent lack of support for HRECs, would there be value in the establishment of some type of support mechanism independent of a government agency? If so, what areas could it support, and what would be its role?
Well, the answer is always yes, because support is something that we always need. And obviously, at university HRECs, we rely very heavily on our university to provide, all of the grunt. So we have lay members who volunteer, but our staff do so and get rewarded through promotions and various things if the system works properly, which it sometimes does. In terms of national support, I mean, we obviously look to the NH and MRC for leadership, but meaningfully supporting HRECs is something that the NH and MRC can only really do through guidance. And, we work on a carrot and stick operation, right? The carrot is that researchers should do the right thing. The stick is that if you don't comply, the NH and MRC won't fund your institution, right? So, when you work on a carrot and stick operation, it's a bit hard to think of this thing as a mechanism that should draw central support from anywhere. I mean, probably the person I'd ask this question to, without a university hat on, would be someone from Bellbury, because Bellbury operates their HRECs as essentially as a going concern, as opposed to a service for researchers. So I'm going to punt a little bit. And
yeah, no, that's good. Well, let's just ask let's just ask that question of Annette then. So
Okay.
Do we need some support agency independent of government, and what do you think?
I think it depends what the support agency is going to do, because Robin's given us one model of support, which is an enhanced program of bringing together committees, bringing together chairs, more nuanced training. I think in that area, and I'm thinking about both of the hats that I wear in a relatively small public sector university and with Bellbury, in that area, we would absolutely gain from doing more together and learning more from each other. Look, it's transparently obvious to me that the more resource that you have sitting in your HREC support system, the more efficiently you can work. Not necessarily the higher the quality of the review, but probably the more painless it is for everyone involved in it. And I think we underestimate at times how important it is to try to make it painless for all of us, whether we're chairs, whether we're members of committees who are doing this as extra stuff for nothing for their institutions, whether we're lay people who on many committees are doing this for nothing, but also particularly for researchers, and really timely responses, really good detail in responses, things that help people to get better at their submissions are all things that I think probably create relationships between researchers and HRECs that are partner relationships rather than relationships where they're in conflict. And more resources really do make a difference there, I think.
And look, I don't want to be a fifth columnist, but I guess I'm wondering, and perhaps I'll just ask this to Hudson. It's like, do we need not a national association of HRECs, but I think something where we actually have a community of practice. I guess sort of like what Robin said and what Annette's alluding to, Hudson. But do you see an advantage of actually having that community of practice where you can actually, reverse engineer thing, instead of being the recipient of guidelines, help to be more involved in the development of guidelines, but also in the education of chairs and deputy chairs?
One, don't let Gordon fool you. He's the fifth columnist par excellence. And two, Gordon, what you've done here for the second year in a row is create a community of practice. that I think works very well in its germinal form.
Could I come back in there? So one of the wonderful things about Bilberry as it has got larger is that there are over 12 chairs now, and it is a community of practice. It's a large enough group. So I think there is a lot to be said for doing that in a way which is beyond once a year with 3 people making phenomenal efforts to bring everyone together. I think the sheer number of people here tells us something about the need.
I think it's a really good point on it. Yeah, I mean, I've always liked the Bilberry model, but I do agree. I think that maybe that 12 is a community. But you know, there's nothing to stop sharing of ideas and views and things in a larger forum. Okay.
Gordon, I just have a question again from the Northern Hemisphere. The institutions I've worked at universities before coming to Bassett, IRBs at universities are supported by indirect costs. And I'm wondering if that occurs in Australia, or the indirect cost is negotiated, particularly for federal grants, so that percentage is negotiated. It's actually pretty generous. Quite often it's in the neighborhood of 40 or 50% of the direct cost. And so I'm wondering if that's different from the circumstances that you guys have.
You know, David, you raise a great point which could be answered on many levels. I mean, you know, we tend to have cost recovery for the most part in hospital IRBs here. But, you know, realistically, I don't think the cost of research and the infrastructure cost of research cover things like ethics committees, which, you know, if that were part of the equation, may actually change the paradigm that we find ourselves in. So yeah, it's quite a contentious one, but really interesting to hear that those indirect costs are covered in the US, because
I mean, at least, you know, a small sample, but the 2 universities where I was a faculty member, it was understood that's the price of doing business.
We've already heard there's such a variety of committees we're talking about here. So there seem to be clinical ethics committees and university-based ethics committees, and you know, in New Zealand Health and Disability ethics committees. The chance of there being a single funding model for all those committees is not very high. So some of the committees I run are funded by the government ministries they are part of. Most of the university committees I've been on are funded by the universities. The HRECs in New Zealand Health and Disabilities ethics committees are funded by the state. I mean, it seems to be unlikely we're going to come up with a single funding model, or for that matter, a very useful community of inquiry, because there's just a huge variety of contexts that we're working in.
And in answer to Robin's question, it doesn't have to be independent of a government, Robin. It's just, you know, sometimes it's good to have an arm's length, I think. And that was, you know, just.
Well, yes and no. I mean, if let's just say, for example, the NHMRC is the organisation that does keep us in check, then that is the organisation really that I guess understands best where improvement needs to happen. And by having, imagine, a more external facing role, less of a carrot and a stick role, but more of an external facing, helpful, educational, iterative sort of type role, then it is something that can work for independent organisations that are largely left to their own devices and may not actually realise that what they are doing has fallen foul of the regulator. You know, I think there's a huge amount to be said for the government developing something like this.
So absolutely, word one, resources and lack of, and 2, they are not regulators, but in any sense. But yeah, I think resources was really the issue, and I think if Jeremy and Gillian are online, they would probably agree that.
There's that legal word again. I'm sorry.
Okay, fair enough. No legalese. Okay, so yesterday's session on HREC processes, we heard from Adrian Barnett that there were many negative views of HRECs from researchers. Undoubtedly, some of his examples would be confirmatory of unusual or inconsistent approaches by HRECs to some subject areas. Is it possible to address the individualism of HRECs and how much might this be achieved in a meaningful way, Di?
That's a good one for me. I actually empathized a lot with Adrian's comments, and I think we've all heard them. I certainly have. I'm not sure what you mean by individualism of the HRECs. You mean certain committees have their own way of dealing with things, and you might get lucky to get on a committee that's very, easy.
Well, I think sometimes you just don't necessarily know what you don't know. So I think it's easy to like go through sort of speciation, if you like, or not quite geographical isolation, but a bit of speciation. If what you do is a certain comfort zone of applications, I mean, how does one get out of that?
I mean, in some ways, I'm feeling that there shouldn't be that, because we should all be following the statement, and there should be no deviation. Of course there is, and that's what's important. I think that's what I really enjoy about being on an ethics committee, is that everybody's different insight into this, a problem. And I think, our committees are like that. We all take value and learn from each other, and we come to hopefully the best decision from that. So I'm not really sure how to answer that question, but to address each one is something I think researchers have been trying to do. How many times have I heard, go to this hospital because they'll be quicker. It's, what more can I say?
Well, the worry is that they say go to that committee because they'll be easier.
Easier.
And so I think you do have forum shopping.
Yeah.
And I think that's a genuine worry. If you know that some committees, so I know, Robin doesn't like the law. I am a lawyer, actually. I'm a philosopher and a lawyer. I love the law. If I couldn't been a philosopher, I would have been a lawyer. One thing you might try and do is impose standards and have an appellate system. So where you tolerate variance between committees, but at least you allow research to say they can appeal to somewhere and have a review. Now that doesn't need to be technical legal review, but the worry is that you have individuals on committee who have bees in their bonnet about something, consent or what have you, and that can be a real trial for researchers. So I've been in that position as a researcher.
Now, Michael, did you have any thoughts about this one?
Patricia has her hand up.
No, but Patricia's, that's another question, Alton. Michael, did you have thoughts on this?
Yeah. I mean, I do. I think inconsistency cuts every way. I mean, I very often get accused of researchers of being inconsistent myself, and they say things like, well, 2 years ago you approved this particular methodology and now you're finding problems with it. And I go back to them and I say, well, yeah, there's been a pandemic, people are under unusual stress. The questions you're asking around X, Y, Z now are triggering for people who are under this particular stress. And so things on the ground have changed. And so even though we're operating under the same rules, the judgments will invariably differ. The other comment I'd make about Adrian's talk yesterday is that it has a feature in the terms of the way researchers and ethics committees interoperate that is something we really could do a lot better at, and that is this notion of we are an adversary to the researcher. Researchers essentially put us in the black hats, and we often do the same for them, right? Those damn researchers, they don't get it. And of course, they're saying the same thing about us behind their hands. Really, it should be a partnership. I'm a researcher as well. So I get what researchers are feeling. It's the same feeling I have every time a journal editor says that my work is no good too. They don't get it, right? Very often it's because I didn't explain it well enough, and I have to accept that, right? So if we could break down this notion that the whole process is adversarial, then a lot of these issues actually disappear. And the difficulty there is how we operate in a dual mode that is both a compliance mode, which is how the universities frame it in very many ways, versus what you would regard as a cooperative research mode, whereby as a university, people who are from different research areas can contribute ideas to each other that enrich the research that is being led, obviously, by the researchers submitting the protocols.
Robin.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. And I think that really has been the challenge, at least for our ethics committee, and something that the team at the Royal Children's Hospital has been extraordinarily good at. And, you know, hats off to them in terms of being able to be really external facing and engaging with the researchers where there is a problem, where there's there's almost like a red flag when you've had 2 or 3 emails going backwards or forwards already over one issue. It's time for a meeting. It's time for a face-to-face and really just trying to convey that sense of we are here to help you. And I say that having been a researcher that thought my hospital's ethics committee was the worst one ever, and really being able to break down those barriers and present ourselves as bearing in mind that we are still holding the interests of our research participants at the heart of everything, being able to try and overcome some of the more rigid aspects of how we deal with our researchers and their ethics applications.
Thank you, Robin. Di?
Yeah, I'm actually, Robin and Michael have said what I was going to say, but I will add that we've talked about this as well, having the researchers come in. And I know that in some IRBs that I'm associated with in the States, that all the applicants come in. They have a sweep through the committee have a sweep through the application, and then either the CI or some representative comes in and they talk about it. It works very well in some places. I'm not sure it's the answer for everyone, but it certainly breaks down those barriers and also allows us to sort of, see where we're coming from. I think it was Michael that said, the reviewer didn't like my work. Well, they didn't understand it. Or maybe I didn't explain it very well. You've got, it's a lot of sort of, soul searching, this sort of stuff, but we've all been there on both sides. And so I think that somehow breaking down these barriers, and it's not a them and us, would be, something to strive for.
Okay, moving on. We've got a question in the chat here. So being an HREC not associated with a university or a large teaching hospital, should small regional remote health services where minimal clinical trials are undertaken who wish to develop research capacity maintain focus on research governance rather than on putting resources into an HREC? What do you think, Annette?
Look, as someone who chairs a committee for a city-state where we actually do cover rural, my ASA Health Committee, I think this links to the points that have just been made about using the HREC to build your skill set. So we ought to be able to get the research office and the HREC working together with the joint goal of improving the quality and the capacity of the researchers in the region. And sometimes that will be with the research office, but sometimes a judicious conversation with a chair of an HREC, a research member, and maybe a layperson is the thing that tips the researcher into thinking a little differently. And it may be that it's the HREC who can help people. The chair of the HREC or one of the researchers can say, look, maybe you need another person on your team. We know some people because we see lots of them. You need this kind of a person on your team, which happens all the time with the South Australian committee that I chair. We're forever not explicitly linking people up, but we are building bridges. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it is a what works best in the particular situation.
Thank you. So David, I might just ask a similar question in relation to smaller HRECs. So of course, having worked at the NHMRC and having sent letters to ethics committees saying, you do 5 applications a year, you might as well not be an ethics committee, or you might want to get them reviewed by someone else. Does the US have a similar policy on, is there any judgment on the currency of ethics committees based on a number of applications it reviews, and is there a push to get rid of smaller ones?
Yeah, I guess I would sort of take the mindset, practice makes perfect. Having the infrastructure is really important for being able to do the job well. And so if you've got a small shop and limited number of projects or something that's just getting started, my inclination would be to try to identify an IRB, or I actually like HREC better than IRB, Institutional Review Board. When you tell that to people, nobody knows what that means. HREC makes a lot more sense. I would think that trying to identify an existing one, it would actually help the cause until you build up enough of a research program to then support your own. And that's sort of what we have provided. We're here, the sort of the hub of a healthcare network. And so we have enough work going on within our hospital and our set of hospitals. But if there are nearby clinics or smaller hospitals that are interested in doing their own research, need that kind of oversight or review, then that's one of the services that we provide for them.
Thank you. Robin, did you have your hand up again, or is it just up?
Yeah, look, I did. One of the other things I do with my time is I look after the intricate needs of a tiny little hospital in far northwestern Victoria that does not have its own HREC committee, and we're actually going through this process at the moment. I might say that, while I agree with being able to outsource everything to a more established HREC, there is something to be gained by that local small hospital in being a part of the ethics process and how it improves and builds the research. So yes, while it might be great to outsource, perhaps the HREC that you are outsourcing to can in turn gain some sort of presence or input from said rural community in order to be able to help explain the specific circumstances of what it is they're trying to do. So I don't think it has to be an all or none, and I really would want to encourage the notion of true diverse, at least geographic diverse representation in Australian HRECs.
I would agree with that. And also the comment made before about bringing the researcher into the meeting of the IRB when we have applications that require full board review. The PI does come in, present the study, which people have already read the application, and gives the opportunity for the board to have dialogue with the researcher. I think that process has worked quite well for us.
I just wanted to add to your point, Robin, and that is thinking of what we've been listening to in the last 3 days, and the fact that you actually have an HREC in a rural, or research in a rural community. You really need the input from that rural area to determine whether the research is appropriate for that area. And it's sort of sometimes hard to see how that can occur if you don't have the mechanism in that area to achieve that. So yeah, I think that's quite a good discussion. There's just a comment here. It's saying it would be interesting to know if Adrian Barnett's research reported on yesterday could identify if Bilberry committees do better at working with researchers than others. So just as a show of hands, how many people on the call, on the chair people, invite researchers into their committee in relation to applications that they feel need more explanation?
We don't invite them into the committee, but we will have meetings with several committee members and the applicant.
Which is what we do.
We do both.
We have, but I think the comment that's being made is about inviting them in at the outset, rather than when you're 2 or 3 cycles down trying to get resolution. And I can see, so that I used to chair an animal ethics committee, and that was a routine practice there. They cycled through inviting in all of their larger research groups, and it made a big difference.
So just for clarity, I think it's yesterday at Royal Brisbane, we have our ethics clinic on Mondays and Tuesdays, where researchers come to that before they even start the process. And, you know, it does build trust, and they do like it. Doesn't make applications better, you know, we'll see. But I think it's a way of breaking down the us and them. And I think that's actually an important way of doing it.
Actually, one point, you know, linking back to something that Annette said earlier, I think it's often just more efficient to have the researcher there for when, you know, rather than trying to wade your way through and work out what's going on. If you've got someone you can just ask a quick question, often you come to have an understanding of the project more quickly, you know, than you do without them, I think.
Yeah, so Mark Barra said they used to do that process. So Mark's at Bond University said they used to do that process of inviting researchers in, but it slows things down. David's saying at the HREC I represent, anyone on the committee who has a conflict of interest has to leave, quite rightly so, prior to discussions. PIs are never allowed to hear the deliberations of the committee, but it sounds like there's a UK model which allows them to hear deliberations of committee. So, you know, maybe there's a way to go there. Okay, now next question then is, under what circumstances, Hudson, would you allow retrospective approval of an ethics application?
I can't think of a one.
Okay, and that's not what I wanted to hear. David?
You asked me that last year too, by the way.
Doesn't matter.
The only circumstance where it's happened for us is where someone has completed their project, submitted it for publication, and the journal editor wants to have some statement about the status of the project with respect to the institution's IRB. And so at that point, obviously it's, you know, late in the game, but at that point, we have the opportunity to go through what they have done. And in the few times that that's happened, we've never had a problem being able to indicate that we reviewed the protocol, we reviewed how the study was conducted, or the project was conducted, it was okay. We certainly, you know, get the word out that that's not an ideal way to do things. But the couple times it's happened, it was triggered by an editor's request when something was submitted for publication.
Thank you, David. Tim, would you like to comment on this one?
So actually, I have a view on this. I've written a paper indeed that was never published. I obviously didn't explain myself clearly. I think we've got this wrong, really. I think, I mean, I probably agree with David about the particular case, but I think the worry about having a blanket rule against retrospective review is that you often require or oblige researchers to repeat research. And so the imposition of the burdens on the participants is repeated. There's obviously a worry you don't want to incentivize not getting consent and so on in advance. But when people have done it, when the research is done, if you can see that there's no problem with it, it strikes me there's an ethical issue with saying to them, you're going to have to go back and do that research again, put all those participants through the same thing. So the incentivization, I think, is the only reason not to do it. The worry that you would tell people, don't bother.
Set a precedent, yeah. Michael, you're looking as if you're cogitating. Would you care to comment?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have done it, and it has happened in the context of an honours student whose life would be utterly ruined if their low risk research, which they accidentally did, you know, didn't get approval. And I took the same view that Tim articulated, which is, well, the participants have already been burdened. And it turns out that the honours student gave them an information sheet and went through a consent process. This might have been good luck, but when we looked at it, we would have approved, you know, we would have made some tinkering changes probably, but at the end of the day, it becomes an issue of, well, do you crucify a researcher, particularly an inexperienced one, in a low risk environment, just to make the point? And this again gets to the idea of, well, are we committing a police action, or are we actually looking at the research process holistically, where people will make mistakes? People make mistakes even when research is approved on both sides. We do and researchers do. And one of the big problems with the modern world is that nobody is willing to own mistakes. This is not a Donald Trump invention. This is something people are just very reluctant to do. And if we lived in a world where people were much more prepared to own mistakes, then I think we could actually look at this a lot more healthily than we currently do, which is to basically criminalise anything that goes out of the ordinary.
So Hudson, before I allow you to talk, I just want to say one of the reasons I have this one this year is because I've just done it myself. And it occurred to me very similarly, I think, Michael, that if what has occurred is no more than low risk research, that there was a process which the ethics committee would otherwise have approved, that it wasn't interventional, I can't really see what the issue is here. We do get a bit dogmatic, I think, in some of these things we do, but I think looking at it holistically, I think that's a word you used, and using certain criteria, I kind of feel there's room to actually, do the right thing for the reasons you mentioned. Hudson, over to you.
Well, in the situation that you described, Michael, I would do the same thing and have had mistakes presented to me that I approve the change without any concern at all on my part. So there is the exception. But why I had my hand up is Gordon. And by the way, Gordon is not only the chair of the biggest ethics committee in Queensland, he's a member of my committee, a valued member. So Gordon, I wanted to ask you, what was the answer you wanted me to give?
I didn't mind. I don't mind what answer anyway.
Oh, okay. Because you said that's not the answer you expected.
It's polemicism, Friday afternoon polemics.
I'm all for that.
So now, Sarah, if Sarah wants to talk or Patricia wants to ask a question, please feel free. You both got your hands up, so you're allowed to. I think you can actually talk if you want to. Sarah, very good.
Sorry, no, that was an error.
Oh, that's a pity. Patricia, did you want to talk? Okay, if not, could the panel comment on the role of lay or community members? There is such a range in selection, training, length of appointment, honorariums, etc. Just trying to scroll through these. Or not, obligation to provide comment or not, and more. So we don't actually have any lay members on here, but what are your thoughts about the role of lay and community members? How do you select them? What do you want them to do? Who would care to answer that one? Di, what do you think, Di?
Yeah, I'll have a stab at that. I mean, I know at UQ that they're selected, there's a process of selection. I can't comment on that and on how they choose them, but my experience now with a couple of committees is that they add a lot of value to the discussion. And as I said before, that's what I find so interesting is, I'm either embarrassed by what I initially thought, or I'm feeling quite smug because I feel that what I thought, should be the decision is actually what everybody decided on as well. But they bring a different, regardless of either of those outcomes, they always bring a different, a bit of insight to them. There is a problem though, at times, and I have brought this up, and I do not mean to be disparaging of our lay people, but it gets to one of your questions in terms of special interest or special expertise. I don't have a lot of expertise in many things, but lay people tend to bring that forward, and it sometimes takes a lot of time in the committee. And while I feel I do not want to scupper that at all, it does take us way off track at times. You're very, very diplomatic, Gordon, and I'm learning from your diplomacy and trying to reduce that. But I think maybe everybody's experienced that to some extent. And I don't say I have a problem dealing with it. I'm just not sure I deal with it the right way. And we tend to go off track a bit more than staying on track.
Well, look, before Robin and Michael comment, I mean, the one thing I have learned as an HREC chair, it does teach you a shed load of humility. I know that I don't know. The only thing I know is that I don't know a lot. So I think in that sense, I'm actually prepared to listen and learn. It can be quite challenging sometimes. Michael, you had your hand up first.
I think Robin did actually.
Oh well, sorry, Robin. Okay, off you go, Robin. Go on.
No, I'm not fussed either, but thank you. So we have a process of EOI and interview for our lay people, and they're enormously valuable for our community, for our committee, I should say. And not only that, but the team at the Children's is able to constantly sort of get feedback from our lay members as well as to how well the committee's doing, as to where their needs need to be met, and what else we need to be able to do in order to support them as being part of the committee. I guess for us, where we struggle, and part of our lay and pastoral care members are really important for us in the sense of the fact that we deal with paediatric research the whole time, and where we really struggle is to get that genuine paediatric voice as the consumer, I guess, in the committee. So yes, our consumer members are enormously important because of the specific sort of research that we look at. Where we struggle is getting an authentic children's voice and also getting an Indigenous voice. That's where we're struggling.
Michael.
2 words: echo chamber. What we don't want is the echo chamber of at ANU. If everyone around the table is a researcher, then it's a bit like watching Fox News without the conservatism. So it's good to have that voice that comes from outside, and one thing that really often surprises me is how important the reputation of the university is to our lay members. Some of them actually will say things like, this piece of research is basically going to be used by people to club the ANU over the head, and what do we think of that? Now, whether that's something that we need to take into account then gets discussed. It's not automatic that we protect the university, but they raise it. The other comment that I'll make about our lay people is that they're not shy to tell researchers to, and I'm going to be use some vulgar language here, bloody make it easy to read, right? I mean, so many times I'm looking at protocols which are cut and paste of an NHMRC proposal or an ARC proposal. It's written in highly vertical language. And our lay people will simply look at it and say, I couldn't read it, send it back, tell them to do it again. And of course, when researchers say you've got to wait a month to get this reviewed because you didn't follow instructions, it comes back better. Not a lot sometimes, but a bit.
Okay, I'm loving this question coming up. Are HRECs playing a greater role in accepting undercooked protocols and giving feedback? So I'm just trying to scroll up, it's really difficult. Okay, let's just stop there. Do HRECs play a part in the issue by accepting undercooked applications and and in the way we give feedback?
I'm happy to have a go at that one, because I think it is a real challenge when you receive an undercooked application and you know that it's actually not the applicant, the student, who really has fallen down here. They're just not well enough supported by their supervisors. And my experience has been that the best thing that you can do is to call a meeting and refuse to have it unless the supervisors are there. And you very quickly address issues. The student, and you have to make the student feel that this is not their fault. You've got to find a way through the conversation which doesn't disparage the supervisor either, because that relationship's really important. And very, very occasionally, we've actually gone, because we get to see applications that come from a number of different universities. So very occasionally, we've gone back to the university and said, we think you've got a problem with one of your, or this area in your institution. The student applications coming from here are not very good. And that was miraculous. They fixed within, well, they've almost fixed overnight. So there are lots of things I think you can do. I think it's really important to make sure that it's the student who is as well supported as you can possibly make them through this process.
So really great point, Annette, and I'm just reflecting on the difference between universities and hospitals, for example, and the types of applications. And I suppose I can comment on both, but I shan't because it's not my party. Di, what are your thoughts about student applications that we may have got in the past?
Oh, I agree with.
What a question, by the way.
I agree with Annette, and we've seen it as well. And if you're going back to our lay members, they're very good at also appreciating that, because they feel that there was a comment yesterday by one of our committee members. What's a supervisor for if they're not going to be able to supervise a good ethics application? That's the core of your research before you can even start. You can't start your research until you can write a good ethics application. So yeah, I just agree with what you've said. It should come back. I don't know if we're hard enough on that. I've seen some of the comments in the chat that about this issue, and I think there's various ways to deal with it. I'm sometimes thinking we should do more and put it back on the supervisors. The other thing that I would mention is we often get pretty substandard applications from very highly regarded researchers. And, you look at it and you say, oh, this is a great team. They've got so much experience. And then when you read it, it's really poor. And, that's just no excuse for that. So I don't know what's going on there all the time, but quite often, again, it's a student that's been left to do this. And I don't know if there's a more insidious reason. So the supervisor said, you go ahead and put it in, our reputation will carry us. But that's, of course, not what we should be doing.
Wonderful. Okay, we have 10 minutes left, not very long, nevertheless. So I'm interested in the issue of registries and an all-out approach to registries and the use thereof, because I think this is a big issue, important to use health information, and we've heard about this for the last few days. But how do we construct a scenario where it's used for a registry and then it might be used for research? So I might ask Robin, because as a hospital HREC, Robin, what role does the ethics committee have in the establishment of registries which are initially constructed as clinical quality, may be used for later things?
Thanks for that. This is something that we are working on, and there is, in fact, a combined hospital research institute working party that's trying to help us deal with this. One of the problems that we have is with registries that have been established some time ago, prior to, obviously iterations of the national statement, and where they appear for, let's just say, an amendment, then there is some work that needs to be done. But I guess overall, we try and ensure that there is an element of consent, whether that's a waiver of consent or true consent, that will meet the future needs of the registry. And we are, as I've said, doing some work with the hospital and also with the state of Victoria about ensuring that this is going to be a fit for purpose going forward.
Hudson, as another hospital HREC chair, what are your thoughts on this one?
Repeat the question.
In relation to the establishment of registries, be they clinical quality or other registries, what role does the ethics committee have in their construction? Noting that ethics committees are largely there to provide advice on research, but registries can indeed be used at some point for research. So in terms of the approach to getting data in registries, be it an opt-out approach or the construction of the registry, what part should the ethics committee play in this process?
I don't know that we can play a direct role. Certainly we play an indirect role in approving and adding conditions to approval of various research activities that take place using registries, but the compilation, the structure, and the ownership of the registries are beyond our ken. This, of course, is coming up more and more. We've seen it. I've seen this grow in the last 2 years tremendously. So it's becoming a big part of our work, not a big part of our problems, and control of registries is a big question, but I think we're tangential to that. that issue. That's my gut.
Okay, and maybe just ask either Michael. Oh no, let me ask David. David, do you have any thoughts on registries?
And in our system, patients have the opportunity to indicate at the outset when they first become patients if they decline to be involved in any kind of research going forward. And in essence, that serves as an opt-out for any future contact. And then beyond that, the existence of a medical record and the degree to, or the way in which an investigator wants to take information from that or contact patients then becomes a project by project issue for the IRB to review.
And Tim, did you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, I've had quite a lot to do with setting up registries, and I agree with Hudson. These seem to me to be a different process. You do want ethics input into developing registries, and ultimately there'll be ethical constraints around using them. But it's a bit unlikely that the kind of ethics committees we're talking about will be involved at the outset of that process, I would have thought.
So can I put a different view?
Sure,
I
of course.
think any registry that is established or maintained which does not have research in its remit is not using its data as fully or as wisely as it could be, particularly as we go forward from this point. So where we've got well-established registries which have been there for yonks, then yes, they're there and they were set up before. But I think particularly when we're dealing with clinical registries, disease-specific registries, and some that can be quite local, then whether it's the HREC or some other organisation that is involved at the outset, ethics involvement at the start can make a huge difference to the quality of the registry, because not everyone setting up a registry knows a lot about how to do it, to the quality of the participant engagement in establishing that, and how easy it is for them later on for the data in the registry to be used for research purposes. So I actually think there's huge potential to be involved and to be helpful here. And I have seen some very odd examples of being asked to come in Johnny come lately and then have to say, well, you know, if you talked to us a bit earlier, we would have been able to help.
Hudson?
Since I would have been a historian if I didn't become an epidemiologist, I'll add the historical note that David and I come from the state that has, I believe, the oldest existing registry in existence, the Connecticut Tumor Registry, which was developed in the 1930s.
Did they get consent for that one, do you reckon, Hudson?
No.
Tim? Oh, you're on mute, Tim.
I wasn't suggesting you don't want ethics input into early on when you're building registries. I think that's vital. I just think it's not clear to me that HDECs or HRECs or the kinds of committees we're talking about are the right people to go to. There are bound to be all sorts of ethical issues. Tissue banks and so on are going to raise them. But you know, I think one of the first comments was made at this panel was about workload, and I can just imagine so there's been quite a few registries set up in New Zealand because of COVID, and the idea that they would all go through an ethics committee to be approved, I think would have been a nightmare. But of course they do want ethics input.
So sometimes I think the early engagement saves you time, because so some of the ones that I've seen are programs of research where you have one approval and then a series of amendments. So in some cases, you're actually speeding up your processes down the track with the stronger engagement at the outset. But not always, I agree with you, yeah. And COVID has made that very obvious too.
Okay. We're going to try two more. And so one of the reasons I asked that question, and it was of interest to me, is because we're certainly going through a process here of making sure registries are established, recognizing that there are so many repositories of data, which probably were not necessarily obtained, properly. But I think establishing a framework for that, and I know Monash has done that, but just making sure it happens here and trying to impose upon that, as you suggest, Annette, the possibility that it might be used for research to get that input at the beginning seems to be a wise use of, a wise use of resources. So probably time for 2 more questions. I know it says 2 minutes, but we'll probably try 2 more questions. Tim, do ethics applications conflate and erroneously submit research and non-research activities, and how do you deal with it?
Well, again, so I'm slightly worried that we're talking about a huge breadth of committees here and different work. Certainly in the ethics committees I sit on, this is a real problem. So I run ethics committees for government ministries, where we have research ethics committees looking at research, and big ministries do a lot of research. But of course, they're essentially operational bodies. They are, handing out wage subsidies and benefits and managing education and so on. And so a lot of their work is operational. And on the face of it, the research committee doesn't deal with operational work, but the line between operational and research, I think, is almost impossible to draw. So I think they're bound to conflate it. I mean, I'm not sure what you yeah.
Okay, Michael, from a university perspective, I'm interested in this because I know that myself and I get, a lot of things that are probably not research.
Yeah. Well, we do too, and most of it comes through government contracts, where a government department has decided to tender a piece of work, and there are multiple issues that arise with that. The first is that the contracts are perfectly sensible for governments, but not at all sensible for research, because very often they have preclusions on publication. They have very, very difficult data ownership provisions. So we're very often looking at contracts, going back to researchers and saying, you do know that you've said to the participants that their participation is confidential, but that the government actually owns all your data. And this usually creates some tension, because the legal office then has to go back to the government with a variation to the contract. And quite often we don't see the contract until someone's bloody signed it, in which case the variation becomes even more complicated. So that kind of stuff is, and sometimes you look at it and you go, is this research? And the answer is, well, what is research? Someone's asked a question, we're going to answer it. So yeah, it's research. Will it be disseminated? Well, yeah, we're going to write a report and the government will either disseminate it or sit on it. But, and so, and plus they paid for it. And the universities got their hands out for the dollars at every moment. So we, as an ethics committee, I can't say, well, we're not looking at it, it's not research, because then I'll have the DVC in my office saying, research income, Michael? Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you got your arm twisted, but okay, Robin, you're nodding sagely. You're laughing actually, but do you have any thoughts on this one?
I'm, increasingly as this session goes on, I'm feeling so grateful for the work that our particular committee does. It's pretty much of high quality, and the team that supports me do a great job. I guess our only non-research, for want of a better word, is trying to dissect out what is research and what becomes quality assurance, and where some of the clinicians in the hospital are asking for ethical approval to do something that is really within the bounds of their quality assurance. So I think that's probably the only area that I stray into. And Michael, I'm so grateful that I don't have the DVC breathing down my neck on a constant basis.
Now, Di, I'm going to turn this one to you, because I know you have some experience of this.
Oh, this one. I thought you were going to ask me a new one.
No.
Look, I would agree with whatever's said, but yeah, we do a lot of sort of navel gazing about, is this research or is it not research? But again, it's, as Michael said, we're asking a question. Is there a question? I guess that's what we always say. What's the question here? And they're following the research process. But yeah, I can't add a whole lot more to what's said. Frustrating at times.
Yeah, and as Hudson will know, sometimes something that comes across market research is not necessarily research. So best to leave that one. David, what do you say?
Yeah.
David, you wanted to comment there?
We actually, am I muted?
No, you're
Yeah,
good.
you're good.
Okay, so we're in a rural area. We actually have quite an extensive research program using social marketing strategies to convince farmers to retrofit roll bars on their tractors so they will not get injured during any kind of tractor rollover. And it's been an incredibly effective research showing savings in terms of hospitalizations, death, and insurance costs. So when I saw that question, I thought, well, I have at least locally one example where marketing research definitely is research.
Okay, I'm fairly sure you're right. Just not always. So I don't know. I just get confused about things like that. And Robin, quality assurance, absolutely. Applications seem to be rife with it. And I think sometimes you can actually dissociate the two. Certainly our legislation, sorry to mention legislation, Robin, actually allows us to dissociate quality assurance from research. But I think there's, it's the old chestnut of it. It's quite confusing sometimes. 49% is fine on one is quality assurance, 49% research, and the bit in the middle is actually quite difficult. Now, listen, it's 3:34, and I did say 3:30, so I actually think we should quit while we're ahead and wrap up. And this has actually been a lot of fun, and I'm sure we could keep going with lots more questions. But I do want to thank you all, and particularly David for staying online. I hope you enjoyed the
Very much so. And I've caught up now. It's Friday for me too.
Yeah, and of course, great that you and Hudson can virtually touch base after 50 years. That's
good to see you, David.
Yeah, so this conference actually brings people together now. So, and Tim, thank you very much for your New Zealand perspective. We could have talked a lot about the land of the long white cloud, and we pay our respects to your Maori contingent. Okay, so I think thank you, Robin and Di and Hudson and Annette and Michael and David and Tim. Great little chat. Yeah, should do this more, Annette. I think we need this community of practice, Annette, don't you think? Okay, well, I'm about to start wrapping up this conference, I believe. So I will put you guys off the screen and I will look straight in the camera. So, okay, well.
Au revoir.
Au revoir, hasta pronto, hasta la próxima, adios, etc. Okay, well, so after 3 days, we've come to the end of a little odyssey. And this was a journey whose, I guess, genesis was the need for more diverse topics. And in the recognition that absent a recent health law meeting, so the ABL meeting, there are actually few opportunities to hear about the diversity of views and research in research in this relevant space. So it is really difficult to single out the talks because we all have different perspectives. But here were a few thoughts I put together. So firstly, I thought the diversity this year was superior to last year. Now, I thought last year was pretty good. It went well, and myself and Sarah patted ourselves on the back, and the organizing committee did as well. But you know what? The diversity of talks, it just, gosh, I cannot believe, the range of talks. And it just shows that there's so much out there that helps us to broaden our horizons. And I think the plenary talks, all of them were just wow. From Ian Kerridge's Science at Warp Speed, demonstrating the risks and benefits associated with getting research happening, to Ian Freckleton's, just amazing. He's such a great speaker about human challenge trials and where that left us. But I've got to say, I did love Di Nichols' talk today about data and genomics and data sharing, just so contemporary and on the on the money that I think it really, for me, just crystallized so many of the things we've talked about: consent, contemporary views, public interest tests. That these are things that we just need to take on board. I think the thread of polemicism and continuity sort of weaved its way through the 3 days and helped to reinforce the fact that while we are gatekeepers to some extent, while I believe HRECs do an incredible job in facilitating research, we shouldn't continue to exist within our own realm of expertise and be able to provide views on all of the research that we see from time to time. I think things like this obviously help to expand our horizons and are exceptionally important. And I think another thread was it's pretty obvious that the national statement doesn't necessarily deal with all of the aspects discussed in detail, as Philomena Horsley talked about today, social and clinical exclusion. And the thing is, I don't think it can, but it provides us a framework, but we have to exist outside that to some extent and bring that perspective that we need either from, from reference groups or elsewhere to give us the answers that we need. And Di Nichols' publication, ours sincerely, will really help us in terms of genomic data sharing. And I suspect there are many other resources out there. So I think it's hard, but it's a fact. It's incumbent upon us as HREC members to develop our own skills and knowledge, but it's equally important to be supported to do so. And while we do our best, we're always constrained by the framework, be that institutional or resource-wise, that supports us. And this probably has to change. So I thought that, and I hope that all online are grateful for the time committed by all speakers. I think it's testament to the generosity of the speakers. Firstly, that they were keen to speak, and secondly, that with one exception, managed to get here, but everyone arrived on time and delivered talks of such high quality. Absent the occasional shifting of the order, it actually worked pretty seamlessly. And I think the engagement of the audience was really much better than last year. So thank you very much for your engagement, the questions, the comments, and the general interest. I think it's amazing how what two people can do. I, of course, had the easy task of running the finished product. However, the brains of the outfit was undoubtedly Sarah Gottliebson, who's a research governance manager for Health Translation Queensland. So Sarah managed to push, prod, and goad and cajole me when necessary. And without Sarah's input and enthusiasm, we couldn't have done this. Hashtag technophobe. Now, Sarah, would you mind just putting on your camera just for a minute, if you don't mind? Okay, well, Sarah's not really listening, but I'll have to go and just deliver these. Give me a second. Sit on your camera. Okay, where are you? Okay, there you are.
Thank
there you are,
you.
Sarah. Have some lovely flowers. Well done, and thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, Gordon.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate your efforts, and I hope everyone else does as well. We should thank our sponsors. That's the Australasian Health Research Ethics Consultancy Services, Praxis, Health Translation Queensland, and we were also supported in spirit by Belbury, and extend our thanks to Kylie Sposton for her support. Important to thank the organising committee for attending meetings, but I think especially to Sarah Potts and Sophie Gatenby, who took the lead in organising a coordinators meeting, an HREC coordinators meeting. And I think that goes to Annette's point about developing a community of practice. So often we think about HRECs in isolation, but we don't necessarily think of the coordinators actually help to support it. And I don't think one can actually exist practically without the other. And we did talk about support. So thank you, Sarah and Sophie, for doing that. And finally, may I thank you, the audience, for your interest. We had 1,490 registrants. And although the maximum we had online at any one time was 500, we didn't collect data on who attended where, which isn't really that important. But what is important is that there is significant interest, and this should be a springboard to a bigger, wider, more regular community of practice. And I do agree, with some of the conversation we had in the HREC chair session. And thank you, chairs. I just, we could go forever on these questions, but I think it does reflect the fact that so many of these questions are ones we face from time to time, and ones that we should be discussing on a, it doesn't have to be a formal basis, but at least on a basis where we can all understand some of these responses. Now, this has been an enlightening and educative 3 days, and I hope you feel likewise. Sarah is hopefully going to send a feedback form to everyone today. I haven't given Sarah the questions to put in there, so that's my fault, not hers. It would be wonderful to get constructive feedback, either positive or negative, so that we can actually construct another conference that meets the needs of this community. So may I finally wish you farewell from the Turrbal, Yagara and Quandamooka lands, and wish you a productive and yet restful weekend, and go in the knowledge that you've attended something that will actually hopefully have given you some perspective and may help to change the views of your ethics committee. So with best wishes from myself, Sarah, and the organizing committee, it's #drop microphone on out from us.